Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 5, Episode 30, the U.S. Liberation Day Edition. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest on this episode is Michelle Wasylyshen, President and CEO, Ontario Craft Wineries. They are the voice of Ontario's VQA wine industry. Over 40 years, 100 members, 100 wineries across Ontario. They're a champion and advocate for growth. What an interesting time to be there. Sylvain, I had the pleasure of working with Michelle at the Retail Council of Canada. I was thrilled she agreed to be on the pod. I can't imagine a more interesting time for Ontario and Canadian wines and spirits.
Yeah, I was happy that you invited her because it's so appropriate right now. Very topical, buy Canadian, buy local. And obviously, my first thought was we need to know more about what's going on with the wine industry in Ontario. And so, great conversation with Michelle for sure.
And I really love that we digged in as well to the whole Canadian trade thing, because it's so limited, right, into Quebec and into BC. Michelle says it's easier to sell to China than it is to sell to Quebec. So
exactly.
We got our own house to get in order here.
I know.
All right. Well, listen.
We're seeing some good news the last few weeks. Seeing bears coming down. We know that alcohol is a big focus, but still, food remains a sector that is not addressed, unfortunately.
Let's get right into the news because there is plenty of it now. Late breaking news. You were on an airplane. I was watching this thing. Trump's
It was pretty frustrating because I was
on
an airplane with no Wi-Fi. I had no clue what was going on. So tell me what happened.
How we've gotten used to that.
Tell me, please.
It's funny how we've gotten used to that. Well, I mean, it's in the Rose Garden, and you just imagine all those foreign leaders, including ours, figuring out their whole economic future, watching some guy doing a show like a talk show host. And he holds up a card.
The Apprentice.
He holds up a card with a chart, and it says, "This is what the tariffs they charge us, and we're going to give them a discounted tariff rate." And he goes down line by, "Oh, they're beautiful people. I lived beautiful people, but they've been ripping us off." So basically, it's an entire reimagination.
So he did a Ross Perot.
Global trade.
He did a Ross Perot, didn't he?
Yeah,
okay.
It's a total reimagination of global trade alliances, big sweeping partners, like more than 100 trading partners that I saw, like from China, the European Union. Now, under the Trump plan, he will put a staggering new 34% tariff on Chinese goods on top of existing, as I understand it. So that's 54% because there's already 20%. Now, I'm not sure it's stacked, but I think I'm reading it is. This is hot news off the press, and I'm not a trade specialist, particularly, given the way that these things roll out.
Oh, no, it's so confusing for everyone, for sure.
Well, and I guess he signed the orders, and the Canadian government, like many governments, I think will just hold off until they read it in writing versus what they see at some press conference, right?
That's right.
And they'll kind of get into it. But European Union, 24%, Japan really nailed, India, 26%, Vietnam 46%.
Colombia, Vietnam are up there, yeah.
Well, Vietnam has become like the hottest growth area for outsourced manufacturing for iPhones.
That's right.
Apple moved a ton of their stuff to Vietnam to get away from China. If you're wearing Nikes, they're probably made in Vietnam. So this has had a big thing. Now, the interesting thing is Canada and Mexico were not on that chart. Of course, that's the first thing I was looking at the chart. I said, "Where's?" Like it wasn't in alphabetical order. I couldn't tell what order it was in.
I think it was based on the amount on the percentage, correct? From up to down.
Well, it was moving around a little bit. Yeah. Apparently, we're left off, and we kind of sit stasis at anything that's non-compliant to CUSMA.
Well, just to tell you exactly how confusing things are, I just got a call. I got two calls from two reporters from two different networks. One actually thought that there was a 10%, and the other thought that there wasn't a 10%. So you can tell that things are pretty confusing.
Yeah, I think I've had I've just spent a half hour, 45 minutes just zipping around every station, and again, late breaking news. It doesn't look like there's 10%. There is 25% on autos, but what I'm not clear on is there's some talk about if it's 50% or greater parts made in the U.S. but assembled in Canada. You know how they flow back and forth across the border, maybe. Anyway, so what's your assessment of all this? I mean, is this kind of a standing down of the anxiety we've had? Because it feels like we've taken our lumps, and the rest of the world now is going to have at it. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I think the entire world, including yours truly, believes that it would be time to get some clarity on this whole issue. We've been going through this circus for more than 2 months now, and this is not good for business. You're forcing agribusinesses to forward buy, build up inventory, basically hedge against what's going to happen at the White House. It's just not sane for anyone. It's bad for credit lines. It's bad for margins. It's bad for cost management. It's bad for everything. And so planning is just so difficult when you're dealing with a president like that. So hopefully after today, there'll be some clarity and no more yin yang, up, down, threats here, threats there. I hope this is going to be over for a while. What I think happened today was that Canada was served a presidential warning for what is to come. And of course, we're going to have to think about the big elephant in the room in Canada, and that's supply management. I don't think we'll be able to avoid this. And frankly, giving more market access to the Americans will likely compromise the very governance of the system itself. And so provinces, which are responsible for quotas, and the CDC, the Canadian Dairy Commission, I'm talking essentially about dairy here, will have to really conduct some tough conversations with both politicians and the industry to really understand what are their options. Because right now, all we're seeing is a government conceding, then we write checks, and then farmers make more money, and then they pretend that they lose money, and they don't. They do not lose money. So let's stop the rhetoric. Let's stop misleading Canadians. They're actually making more money with treaties. That it is not sustainable. We need a strategy here, and right now we do not have a strategy.
There was one mention of Canada in the Trump press conference, and that was around dairy. Now, he talked about 200-300% tariffs. Now, my understanding is, and one commentator was saying this, and if you correct me if I'm wrong or just kind of put some clarifying, that Canada, A, is the number 2 importer of U.S. dairy. That was news to me. And 2, that these 100% tariffs are kind of escalating and that we've never hit them. We've never got near the threshold. That wasn't news to me. But could you just clarify those 2 points and give me your thoughts around, is there even a capacity in this country to take more U.S. dairy? We already got so much.
Oh, no, absolutely. So we sell for about, I'd say, probably $350 million worth of dairy to the U.S. now under CUSMA, and we also buy as well more on the ingredient side, because I'm sure you and many of your friends haven't noticed more American products at the grocery store. And I'm talking about before the Buy Canadian movement. I mean, last year or the year before, I certainly didn't notice more American products because we're not honoring our promise to import more dairy products from the U.S. We're just not doing it. If you actually look at the recent FCC report, we're basically under our threshold of 2.83%, depending on the category. We are not importing as much as we promised that we would import, and that really is upsetting the Americans. And so the quota system that we allocate to companies to import products in the U.S. is discriminates against American products because, let's say Loblaw, for example, has quotas. Do you think Loblaw is incentivized to bring in more competition from the U.S.? They already have some really fantastic products. I mean, would they want more cheddar from the U.S.? Really? I mean, and then it would steal some sales from their President's Choice products at the dairy section. You see what happened in the last few years, and Americans are really upset with us.
Where does that journey end? I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, other than maybe Maxime Bernier, who's really the only kind of a fringe candidate talking about supply management, every other candidate in the election has said it's hands off supply management. And so where do you see this going?
I think everyone's wrong. including Maxime Bernier. Maxime Bernier actually is advocating for the abolishment of the system, but has no strategy beyond that. If we are to believe that Canadians are not willing to accept the fact that we will or we should drink and eat American dairy products from now on, we need some sovereignty. We need some domestic production. So in order to do that, you need to make it more efficient, more competitive. And right now it isn't. So what that means, you need to rework the formula, the pricing formula that's managed by the Canadian Dairy Commission. You need to basically make sure that it drops, because right now, okay, just so you know, in the U.S., okay, industrial milk is about $66 a kilo, okay?
Okay.
Here, it's almost double that. So tomorrow, if you get rid of quotas, if you get rid of barriers, you're going to kill the entire industry. They're just not competitive, especially east of Toronto, from Toronto to St. John, Newfoundland. We're just not there at all. So we need to figure out a plan here to make the sector more competitive. And two, we need to set ourselves up for exports. People want Canadian products all over the world. Look at what happened in New Zealand. Fonterra was set up after they dismantled supply management in 1987. And today, a country of 3 million people exports for, get this, $20 billion worth of dairy products to Asia and other parts of the world. And they are in the middle of nowhere. They had a strategy. That's what we need.
Interesting. New Zealand, I see New Zealand all the time, grass-fed, right? So they have a strategy, but they got weather. Here.
So
they got some good weather.
So when you talk to dairy farmers, oh no, we can't export milk; it's too heavy, it's liquid, blah blah blah. We got New Zealand stuff here. That's not a problem for them. Why is it a problem for us? We have the Chinese building plants in our own backyard in Kingston. We've talked about this. Canada Royal Milk. We have Coca-Cola building a plant in Peterborough for Fairlife. These are plants that should have been Canadian. But because of our lack of foresight, we're just allowing other countries to innovate for us.
Well, I was going to talk to you about a positive thing that happened in the race for the prime ministership, where Carney said that he would not put countervailing tariffs on food, which I think you would see as very positive. But now it kind of becomes a bit of a moot point, the way the things have seemed to be rolling out today. But it's still a positive thing, right? Maybe we even roll back some because, there's an argument to be. What do you think?
I'll be honest. I appreciated the tone. I do think that Prime Minister Carney, or Mark Carney, because we're in an election, is way more targeted and strategic, and that's what we need right now. And so he's very, very focused on certain vectors, and he knows that counter tariffs will only hit Canadians. So I actually did appreciate his comment yesterday about that, basically acknowledging that food is precious. It's an important thing. And of course, today he's been talking about supply management and food manufacturing. And those are important discussions. And frankly, every time an election allows for some politicians to talk about food, I'm happy because it's rare. So I'll take it.
Yeah, no kidding. In our next, I was going to do it this episode, but let's do it. There's so much to talk about with the Trump thing that we'll do it next episode. Your kind of wish list for our politicians. We still got a couple of weeks left about what you'd like to see on the docket in terms of priorities. Let's move on a little bit and talk about this. We of course had this massive thing where we all were looking for buying Canadian labels. Now there is a report out that there were 57 complaints filed with the CFIA regarding let's call it maple washing. I don't know. Tell me about the report and what your observations were.
Yeah, there were. So first of all, 57 may not sound like a lot, but it is a lot because it's actually complicated to file a complaint. So if you have 57 complaints at the CFIA, chances are you probably had hundreds of people going to management in grocery stores complaining. And you're the retail guy, you're the expert. You probably know that when it comes to Buy Canadian, there's been a lot of complaints, observations, because people are looking and people are asking questions. And
well, the competitors are looking. So if it's complex to put in a complaint, it's probably their competitors. It's another business more than consumers.
That's right.
Would you say? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But there were 6 cases where the retailer was at fault, or the packaging was not in compliance. So, and frankly, I'm not surprised, but I wouldn't blame the industry either, because what's going on right now is pretty unprecedented. It's pretty severe, this pivoting away from American products. I mean, anybody who's walking into a grocery store can tell that there's been a lot of work on shelves, labeling, promoting Canadian products. You got all sorts of signs.
You saw your first tea, right? You finally saw your first tea. I
saw my first tea. Yeah, exactly. And so I calculate exactly how much tariff actually Loblaw paid on that product. So it kind of helps a little bit understanding pricing, understanding where food is coming from, and frankly, I think it's all good. It's great that people are looking at packaging, they're looking at labels, and if they want to complain, well, power to them.
It's early minutes, literally, since all this is rolling out, kind of back up to the top. Does this put kind of a I don't want to say a dent, but does this make the don't buy American stuff a little less important now? Really, as we talked about, it was a mix of tariffs and this attack on our sovereignty, 51st state stuff. So that happened even last week. He was talking about that nonsense. But he didn't say it. He didn't say it this week. Now he's got a lot of other people he's pissing off. So, whatever. Maybe it'll come back up again. But I thought it was interesting. And then, of course, and you pointed out he had a conversation with Prime Minister Carney that was something like approaching civilized. So I wonder if the momentum behind our liquor coming back on the shelves of LCBOs, I wonder. Interesting. Or what do you think?
It's absolutely interesting. And frankly, I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. I think it's more about our feelings, I guess. I mean, it will be up to the Canadian public to decide. I think there are many reasons not to appreciate what's happening in Washington still. For a variety of different reasons. I mean, it's been quite chaotic over the last 3 months beyond tariffs. Now, there is some clarity today, but did people absolutely decide to buy Canadian because of tariffs, or because they just disliked the administration and this one man? And I think that the latter still remains.
Well, I think, I've always said, let the Americans do what the Americans going to do. But when he starts attacking Canada's sovereignty, that's where it crossed the line, I think, for Canadians, right? It's like, okay, I don't love a lot of the other decisions, but it's your country to manage, kind of thing. But when you start, throwing punches at us, we're gonna, elbows up.
But right? It's funny about. Last night I actually had dinner with two friends from New York City. They're Canadian. They've been living in New York City for 5 years now, and they work for big firms on Wall Street, and their observation I thought was really interesting last night. I mean, Americans are so inner focused right now; they don't really know what's going on. There's not a whole lot, and you've been to America a couple of times yourself, and there's not a whole lot to talk about tariffs. And I did a podcast with an American this week, and he came to Canada a couple of weeks ago. He was surprised that tariffs were just the topic. In America, it's just not the topic.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. They got a lot going. On. I feel for my friends
but I do think that Trump's approach today is not compromising the cost of food in America, because we sell for about $44 billion worth of food. Mexico sells for $52 billion worth of food. That's a lot of food that is not being compromised. So I'm not sure that Americans will see much of a difference with all these tariffs going on. With non-food, of course, things are way more complicated. Cars, chips, all the stuff you mentioned with phones. Of course, that's getting complicated. But when it comes to food, I actually don't think that Americans will see much of a difference.
Maybe in the wine, maybe in wine and spirits, right? If you're putting those kind of tariffs on the EU, and there's a lot of wine that is champagne that's drunk that could go up significantly, but we'll see, I guess. Let's talk about one thing in America that seems to be getting better on the one hand and coming here on the other hand, and that's the avian flu. So, in fact, it was part of Trump today talking about how we fixed it. And by and large, as we talked about, the issue and the wholesale prices is kind of coming back to earth. There seems to be, they seem to be past the worst of the whole egg shortage thing, but we're now seeing some bird flu outbreaks here. Talk about it.
Not exactly, because you see, 20% as part of CUSMA, we can actually import eggs from the United States to hatch, to actually support our farmers. So about 20% are imported hatching eggs, and we're short this year because of the avian flu in the U.S. And so they didn't have enough hatching eggs to ship to Canada. So some parts of Canada, including my own province, Nova Scotia, we're going to be short on meat, chicken meat. Now, is that a problem? The beauty of the chicken sector is that you can recover very quickly. It takes 9 weeks to actually get a chicken to slaughter. It's very fast. It's a very intensive production cycle. So I don't believe it's going to make much of a difference, but the avian flu is impacting parts of Canada right now.
Interesting. Not in the way that I was thinking, but actually in the way that there's just less chickens, not avian flu itself here. That's what I was interpreting, right? I got that right? Okay.
It's a very integrated market, and that's why the chicken industry and eggs are a little different than dairy when it comes to supply management. I've always treated them very differently. And so, but the chicken sector, I think, will be fine. I don't think we will see any shortages or anything like that. Don't go on a chicken run out there and help the chicken. You'll be fine. Yeah, we're still talking about the egg before the chicken. Still.
Oh, good one. Good one. Hey, all right, let's leave it there for a few minutes. Let's take a break and hear from our amazing sponsor, presenting sponsor, Cattle, and we'll get to our interview with Michelle from Ontario Craft Wineries. Does your digital customer engagement strategy need a serious upgrade? Enter Cattle, Canada's consumer insights powerhouse with the largest, most active panel of everyday shoppers. They're not your typical sponsor. They're the voice of the consumer, always in the know on the hottest trends and shaping what's next. So why Cattle? They go beyond consumer insights. They're trailblazing the future of ratings and reviews and leading the charge in user-generated content with unmatched syndicated receipt data and the ability to gather reviews across any category. Cattle partners with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire to deliver results that count. Visit askcattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's askcattle.com. Michelle, welcome to the Food Professor podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am great. Thank you for having me.
Well, you and I know each other really well. It's such a treat to hear your voice again. It's been a minute since, we spent so much time together at Retail Council Canada talking about bigger issues. And it's a real treat, like I said, to get you on the mic with us in your new, exciting new role here in Ontario. Well, let's start there. Tell listeners who you are and your background and what you do for a living and all about Ontario Craft Wineries.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, you and I met in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. I had just joined Retail Council, and I remember you contacting me to help you set up guests for your podcast. And so it's incredibly exciting to now be on your podcast. I think I feel like I've gone full circle. I have quite a varied background. I have worked in government before joining Retail Council. I was in the Premier's office where I had the alcohol file. Before that, I was in the Ministry of Finance. I have worked for OMERS. I have worked for Enbridge. I have worked for a consulting firm. And then I took a little bit of time off because I have twin boys who are now 9 years old. And one of them made me promise that I would give a shout out to him on your podcast. And that's because he thinks Mummy's job is super cool. And he always says to Mummy, hey, Mummy, did you get that wine job? So I am the president and CEO of the Ontario Craft Wineries. Speaking of full circle, it almost feels like I've gone full circle in this job, and that's because I was born and raised in the Niagara region. I haven't lived there in quite some time, but I still have a significant number of family members there. And so, I have grown up knowing about the wine sector in Ontario. When I lived in the Niagara region, at that time, it was so tiny. There were a handful of wineries, and now across Ontario, we have about 190 VQA wineries. My association, which is the Ontario Craft Wineries, we represent about 120. And so we represent that number of wineries from the Niagara region, Prince Edward County. I was just there last week, and it was amazing. The Lake Erie North Shore, as well as some of the emerging wine-producing regions, such as Ontario's South Coast and the Georgian Bay, Grey County. So it's grown substantially in a couple of decades, and hopefully we continue on that trajectory.
Well, a couple of quick follow-up questions. Do you, about yourself, do you consider yourself a communicator, a lobbyist, a marketer, a policy person? You've had a variety of backgrounds, but when you describe yourself in a sentence or two, how do you frame that?
You know what? I love that question, and thank you for asking it, because I believe that I am a public affairs practitioner, but I've had experience. I'm moving my arms right now with every tentacle of public affairs. So right. I am a lobbyist. I am a communications expert. I have been in the media extensively. So I have done all of those channels that I believe are necessary in order to make public affairs as a whole successful. You can't have one of those channels successful without ensuring that everything else is looped in. Stakeholder relations has always kind of been my, my expertise and my love. Policy, government relations, media relations. So they really do all fit together. And I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I've had significant experience in each of those branches.
Yeah, and now you've got the membership experience, which is also another dimension, right? Is not just speaking on behalf of folks, but also representing them, and then them asking you to, represent them in different ways along different files, I guess, as we would call it. Now, you mentioned something.
100%, and I'll just give a shout out to RCC for that, because had I not been under the keen eye of Deanne Brisbois, who I think is probably the guru of all membership associations, I would not be successful in my job today. And so definitely a big shout out, because I understand the importance of members in driving an industry association.
Fantastic. Now, my second question is, you mentioned this phrase VQA, and I want to make sure, we have listeners from across the country and around the world. So when you say a VQA wine, what does that mean?
So VQA wine, that stands for Vintners Quality Alliance. And so when you buy an VQA wine, that is a made in Ontario story. We are a made in Ontario industry. So VQA means that 100% of those grapes were grown in Ontario. The product was manufactured in Ontario. It was bottled in Ontario. And so every VQA wine is 100% Ontario. We are a massive Ontario industry. And the good thing about that is I'm proud to be a part of that, but consumers can be very proud of purchasing those wines, because you're ensuring that the economic development of purchasing that wine remains in the province. We support jobs, many of them in rural areas. We support tourism, farm families. We are stewards of agricultural land, leaders in sustainability. All of that stays within the province of Ontario when you buy a VQA wine.
I was thinking about our discussion today. Sylvain and I were chatting about it on Friday, and it's almost like that Mark Twain, best of times, worst of times. We're at a moment where Buy Canadian is meaningful. First time in my career, really, that it's so meaningful. Some of your competitive product has been removed entirely from the shelves of the LCBO, so there's some goodness in that from your perspective. Have you observed, and you and your members observed, a a real increase in consumer preference, or is this just talk right now? Are you seeing some numbers?
It's not talk. We are realizing, and it's, it's interesting because I had a conversation with somebody recently, and he talked about whether the Buy Canadian was a movement or a momentum, right? And obviously there's a big distinction there, and we really hope it's a movement. It is bittersweet. There's a lot of excitement for us, although there's a lot of anxiety for other sectors. But today, we have a massive opportunity before us. And so when we saw the LCBO take U.S. products off the shelves, we knew that Ontario products were going to be placed on those shelves and made up for that removal. And so what we're seeing right now, already in the early days, is that our VQA Ontario wines are up about 30% in the LCBO right now. Wow. Some of my members last week even told me that they're seeing growth of between 70 and 80%. It's really through the roof. It's really quite remarkable.
So is that year to year, Michelle?
Well, so really during normal times, we actually only represent about 6% of sales within the LCBO. Within grocery, it's much higher. Grocery is a very successful channel for Ontario VQA wines. We're about 30%. And so what I was going to say is we're really seeing a significant amount of growth within the LCBO right now, which is really important, both to us, the LCBO, the province. It's through the roof. Now we just have to work to sustain that growth.
There's a lot of talk about interprovincial trade barriers and of course trades between provinces in relation to alcoholic products. How do you feel about this ongoing debate of barriers? Do you feel confident that things will actually happen this time? Because I mean, I've been following this file for several years, as you have as well. How confident do you feel right now with this debate?
So here, let me give you a little bit of a long answer because I think we feel cautiously optimistic. So, like you. We have been, not me personally, but the organization has been talking about this for 25 years. I was informed the other day that we actually had a campaign about 10 years ago called Free My Grapes. And so it's a long time, right? So with the threat...
Actually, I remember that campaign. I was like 12 at the time. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's unfortunate that it's taken a major tariff war to get this on the radar, but from our perspective, our message is simple. Anything that we can do to reduce barriers for VQA wines is long overdue. It's really quite interesting because right now, my members, it's easier for them to sell to the international market than it is to Quebec. So think about that. It's easier for my members in Ontario to sell to, for example, the UK, Asia Pacific, Nordic countries such as Norway, Denmark, Sweden, just for a few examples, than it is to sell to Quebec. So It's really quite shocking. So definitely, we are super excited. One, just kind of to quash one of the myths out there is that, we don't export a lot of our Canadian wine to the U.S. There's really an imbalance of trade when it comes to wine. And so Canada does not export any significant amount of wine into the US. But on the other hand, we are the largest export market for US wine. And so, when we're being cheeky, we always say that we can hurt the US more than they can hurt us. And so I think that's why you've seen the removal of those products from our shelves. But in the meantime, we absolutely need to come together to be one market in Canada. Right now, we are we have extremely highly fragmented regulations between each province. And we can't wait to see the day when we have Ontario VQA wines, BC VQA wines, and Nova Scotia VQA wines all on the same shelf. Can you imagine?
That would be great. What is your group doing to capitalize on this particular movement at this point? Have you had discussions with your group about that?
Well, 100%. And, our discussions are really not different than they have been in the past. We have always pushed local Ontario VQA wine. The difference now is that consumers are really perking up and they're listening, right? And so the Buy Canadian sentiment is a blessing for us. As I said earlier, it's a little bit tricky and stressful for other industries, but for us, it is a blessing. It's a major, what we hope to be, movement. So we have a lot going on right now. We have a lot of work to educate the consumer on Ontario craft wines, the benefit of them. We have some cheeky campaigns out there. I don't know if you've seen them, but, we have some cheeky campaigns such as less politics, more Pinot, keep your dollars close. Keep your dollars close and your Ontario VQA wine closer. Screw the tariffs, pop the cork. But on a more serious note, there's lots of education on VQA. I'll just run through, a quick little story here. I was reading in a newspaper a couple of weeks ago. It profiled a customer that was in the LCBO. And so they talked to that customer, and the customer had just talked about coming from the grocery store. And they had looked for all kinds of Ontario products at the grocery store and filled their cart with them and left feeling good. And then they came to the LCBO and they said, well, we're not going to buy that US California Chardonnay. But you know what? Maybe we'll try South Africa, or maybe we'll try Australia. Right. And so we really still have education to do, that it's no different than your groceries. When you're at the grocery store looking for those Ontario products, when you come to the LCBO, we want you to be doing the same. And that's because, again, no different than what we've always said, but local, local, local. When you buy our products, the economic development of doing so remains in the province. Tourism, jobs, farm families, right? So local, 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 Ontario, Ontario, Ontario. And so we're really, really working to educate the consumer on that, just as we have in the past, but hopefully with a little bit of a finer ear this time around.
Do you work with other groups in Ontario to support your strategy in promoting local products?
Absolutely. And so last week, I just signed a memorandum of understanding with the Canadian manufacturers and exporters who are out there really promoting Buy Canadian and Buy Local. We have had a great relationship develop because of my past relationship through the RCC with Restaurants Canada. And so a quick note on that: when you go into a restaurant, it is incredibly difficult to find an Ontario VQA wine in that restaurant. We're really looking to change that. And so we have a great new relationship with Restaurants Canada and trying to get local products into restaurants. Their consumers are asking for them, and we can deliver. And then, of course, retailers. As I said at the beginning of our interview, our sales in grocery stores have always been incredible. They're about 30%, and we want to maintain that and to grow that. And so our partners with retailers are important, more so now than ever before. Convenience stores, we're on the shelves. Some of my larger members are on the shelves, and we definitely need to grow that. But we are looking for collaborative efforts across the table when it comes to promoting any local product, us included.
So we've been spending our time talking mostly what I might describe as tailwinds. Let's talk about some headwinds. So even before the tariff issues, we have what seems to be a systematic or a structural decline in alcohol consumption overall. And then secondly, with these tariffs probably comes, I'm guessing, some input costs that go up, not down, in terms of the packaging and wine and labels and whatever. So could you speak to both of those and talk about what's your understanding of those things, and then how you and your members are working through those issues?
Well, we have seen a little bit of a movement towards, I guess, those who may not, drink, or taking a break from drinking and looking for I think they call themselves sober curious. I think that's always out there. I mean, we have always advocated for the consumption of wine, obviously in a responsible manner. And so there's really not a change in there. As a mom of two young twins with a crazy schedule, I can't imagine how you would not enjoy, the odd glass of wine, but, we'll leave that to others. So I think there's a little bit of an impact there, but perhaps not across the board. There's just, it's just really a great opportunity right now with the Buy Canadian movement. We are definitely able to rise to that occasion. When you talk about increase in terms of packaging and those kinds of things, again, we're really an Ontario story. Everything happens here in Ontario. We grow the grapes, we package the wine, we manufacture the wine, we bottle the wine. So everything really is here in Ontario. And so I don't think that you will see a number of increases when you look at our wine. It's a good news story all around for everyone, and I expect that to continue.
That's great. I was thinking of you on the weekend as I long held against the screw top on wines, and then I became a convert, just as equal to or greater than quality. But I'm surprised that you don't see a little pop up in the aluminum screw top, or even the cans, the aluminum cans. I know some of your members put it in the cans, but so far you're feeling good about it.
Absolutely. Yes, definitely. Maybe some changes will come, but on the whole, we are an Ontario industry, and we're, Ontario all around.
Yeah. So, in terms of policy, what are some of the, what are some of the issues that you're trying to address as a group? I'd say over the next 5 years or so. What's on your dashboard as leader of this group?
It's been a really interesting experience because we are a good news story, right? I'm not no slag to tobacco, but I'm not advocating for those kinds of products. I'm advocating for an agricultural product, and so we really have great relationships across the board. I would say that, there's a lot of policy work that was put in place before the tariff battle hit. And so we saw that the government of Ontario last July, they sent a directive to the LCBO where they asked the LCBO to elevate their focus on small and mid-sized craft producers, i.e. us. And so I think even before the tariff battle hit, we were in the process of ensuring that we were going to start seeing more craft wineries in the LCBO going forward. And so definitely, we're seeing that now. We're seeing it elevated because of the trade war. For example, just a few weeks ago before the March break, the LCBO issued a new product call for craft wineries. And so in the LCBO, between the end of April and the beginning of May, you're going to see a whole new host of VQA Ontario wine products, which is really exciting for us. And so I think there's really been a focus from the government, even before we were in this difficult position, that there was recognition of the value of Ontario wines. We are a farm success story, manufacturing story. My biggest member, for example, would have 100 employees. My smallest member would have 2. And so we really run the gamut, but we are a source of pride for this province, and hopefully we will be so for consumers as well.
For our listeners, how can we get in touch with your group, and how can find out more about craft wines in Ontario?
So you can go to the LCBO, you can go to our wineries. And so not all of my members, so again, I represent about 120 VQA wineries across the province. Not all of them have the end game of reaching the consumer in the LCBO. Some of them encourage consumers to come to their wineries. And so really, we are across the province. We're everywhere. When you go into the LCBO, look for the VQA symbol. It is very different than if it just says Canadian made. If it says Canadian made, then what the requirement is that it could contain 25% of Ontario grapes, but the remainder can be made up from international blends. And so it's really important to distinguish the difference between Canadian made and VQA. You want to look for VQA. The LCBO has a really cool campaign on their website right now called the A List. And so they will show you all of the great Ontario wines. And it's the A List, as in the EH, the A List, which is pretty cheeky. But they'll also show you all of the substitutes. I think that there is a perception out there that Ontario wines are very expensive. And that's not true. We have outstanding, qualitatively matched or superior products to imports. And if you like that $27 bottle of California Chardonnay, we have something for you. If you like that $17 bottle of Chardonnay, California Chardonnay, we have something for you. And so we really do have a range of products across the board. And we do believe that if consumers and when consumers try us, that they probably wouldn't want to go back.
My experience in Ontario is that I felt that Ontario wines were actually affordable. Some of them were expensive, but there were many that were actually quite affordable. So I'm surprised that there's that myth out there for sure. Michelle, listen, I want to thank you so much for your time for joining the Food Professor podcast, and all the best to you in this new role.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you highlighting our wines. Thank you so much.
Sylvain, I have a question for you. Are you a big Hooters fan? I mean, of course. I mean, of course, the restaurant.
The restaurant. I've never been. I've never been.
Hooters, HOA Hooters of America. There's actually how many? There's 4 in Canada. Anyway, they just went into protection in the U.S.
Where are they?
There's one in Toronto, downtown, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and one somewhere else in Toronto. So there's 2 in Ontario, one in Saskatoon, one in Winnipeg. Kind of a random.
Oh, there's one by the airport, I think.
Yeah, there's one downtown, so that could be the case. So you do go. You at least you see it flying over it anyway.
It's off the highway. Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Anyway, so here's an interesting restaurant concept that I don't get myself. Because they portray themselves as a family restaurant. I remember going in there in Florida 25 years ago because it was kind of like a big thing. And I'm like, I was with a friend on a business trip, and I'm like, I don't understand this place at all. And sure enough, it was, single guys, of course, as you might imagine, but lots of families with their kids. And I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, why on earth are you here? Given the round of change you have. But anyway,
Yikes.
They're going to live again. So they've got the core franchisee is going to buy up and form a group. And it looks like they're going to buy them out of protection, thin down a bit. They'll all be franchised.
So they're going to survive. Okay.
Hooters will live again, live to serve more.
Listen,
wings,
I got 3 girls. I just ethically, morally, I just can't go. I don't support it. And power to them. If there's a market for that, great. But I'm not part of that market at all. But I don't think there's a future for a model like that, to be honest. I think that we can be creative in many other ways.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised it lasted this long, but now
I know, me too. I didn't know they were still around.
Yeah, well, I think the pendulum's gone the other way in America, so I think they'll be fine in America. I think the concept was just old, basically. It's been around a long time and nothing's changed. Kind of like the Bay, been around a long time, nothing changed.
Well, I'm French, and I didn't even know what Hooters meant until, no, but seriously, I like people were saying Hooters. I didn't know what Hooters,
you didn't get the joke.
I thought it was,
it's all about owls. It's all about owls. That's right. It's all about owls. Hey, I wanted to finish off with a highlight or a shout out to a great Canadian food manufacturer. And the one I picked was Midday Squares. Now, you remember we had Jake Carls on the show, and Jake Carls actually is Michelle's keynote at her upcoming conference. Nobody gets a group going as much as Jake
Oh, my God, no. And they're in for a treat.
And they have been in the news lately because they were very successful getting a huge U.S. business, listings with Target and other things. So they were really worried about, are we going to have to move manufacturing? Can we even move manufacturing? So this might be a better day for Jake and the team, and we hope so. But anyway, if you're in for a midday snack, Midday Squares, you'll find them. They're refrigerated in all the grocery stores. I love them as a little midday, healthy, better for you snack. So shout out to Quebec's Midday Squares. They're great success. Jake Carls, if you're listening, which you probably aren't because you move 1,000,000 miles an hour, but just in case you are,
But
really,
you're right,
everybody...
absolutely. And there's been a few companies out there. You remember we talked to Nicholas Mulroney about this a few weeks ago, and I think it's going to really calm things down quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So this is a good day. This is a good day.
Listen, well, let's leave it there. I'm Michael LeBlanc, media entrepreneur and consumer growth advocate, and you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Safe travels, everybody.
Take care.